Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. Let's have a look at the preview version of Civilization 6. I spent a good few hours on stream with this earlier, and after about 4 or 5 hours of play, I have some initial thoughts. Civilization games generally take a long time to properly assess. The issues that these games have are often shaken loose after hundreds of hours of play, and to expect any sort of in-depth analysis of something like this that isn't even out yet or complete is not wise. So I would suggest you don't take it as such. Take it as what it is, which is initial feelings and thoughts and a couple of indications as to what the main differences are between this and previous Civilization games and the kind of things that may trip you up if you start with the game, as I did, having not played a Civilization game for quite a while. You know, since the first few weeks after Brave New World came out. I mean, I didn't play much of Beyond Earth, I admit. It wasn't much of a Civilization game to me. It wasn't something that I found all entertaining. But along comes Civ 6, and it will be out relatively soon. And there have been some fairly radical changes that caused me... I wouldn't say consternation, man, because I don't want you to get the idea that I found these changes to be a negative. No. They're not a negative. What they did do is make the game more complex than Civ games that I've played previously, and somewhat less approachable. But that doesn't mean they're bad. In fact, I think it probably means that the game is going to have a lot more depth and longevity in the long term, assuming you're willing to get over that initial hump of really not knowing what the hell you're doing. Despite having played every Civ game that exists, including the 2 Call to Powers, for God's sake, it's not as if you can't start playing Civ 6 and do the very basics. If you played a Civ game, you know how it works. You have a settler, you go build a city. In that city, you then build either units or structures. You build another settler eventually, take your second city, research technology, and so on and so forth. This is all very familiar. But what I found very unfamiliar was one of the most radical changes to this series, which is the so-called district system. Now, in previous Civilization games, cities have, for the most part, been self-contained units. You sit on a hex, or in the earlier games, a square, and everything in your city is jam-packed in that one little area. Of course, around that area, you could have improvements to the surrounding terrain, which could be exploited by the citizens in your city, and that continues to be the case. However, the majority of buildings in Civilization 6 are not built in the city. They're built outside of it, and you can very clearly see that right here. You'll notice I have 3 wonders surrounding London here. The Hanging Gardens of, well, London, the Great Lighthouse, and the Colossus, all on the coast here. They all take up individual spaces, and I love that about it. It gives a truly epic feel to each of these buildings. They are landmarks in the truest sense of the word, and they're hell of a pretty to look at as well, so I'm really happy about that. However, it's the districts which are unusual, so let me find a district for you. Here's one. This is a holy site right here. Now, this holy site is a district that can be constructed. It's in the same way that a regular building could be if we head on over to London here. There we go. And have a look at the city details. I want to build something. I would love to build something. There we go. There's the production. So these districts are going to pop up in this list right here. And you see the holy site has been built. And the districts take up a hex on the map within the territory that that city has under its control. So it's going to take up space that would, in previous Civilization games, be taken up by improvements that are usually exploited by the citizens, and those still exist. So if we head on back here, we can go just get rid of this bloody thing, head on over to civilian management, and you can see, hey, here are all the hexes. Here are all the hexes that we're currently mining. Here are all the resources you get from it. Very Civ-like, right? Food, production, gold, absolutely. And these improvements right here, such as this farm, actually this is a mine, never mind, is going to give me a bunch of extra production, and those are constructed by builders. That sounds very familiar, right? Here's the thing. At this point, you have to choose between improving the terrain or creating a district upon which other buildings can be built. They are mutually exclusive. The way that in previous Civilization games you would generally build your city is you stuff all the buildings in the city hex and everything around it is improvements, 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 improvements. As many as you get. Just completely cover the land in improvements. That's not the case anymore. You've got to choose between the two. This holy site right here actually has 3 buildings in it. And when I constructed the holy site, I was then able to construct buildings within that district. We go back to production for a second. For some reason, I never quite get this right. Where is it? Where the bloody hell is it? Is it details? Usually you just double click on it, but there we go. You've got to kind of click that little area for some reason. When you construct one of these zones, it's going to give you buildings that you can make within it. And in this case, I've upgraded this holy site several times with a shrine, a temple, and a meeting house. So it's generating all sorts of useful stuff in this one area. And the placement of these districts is absolutely key. And this is what confused the hell out of me upon initially playing this game. And honestly, I really want to restart this right now. I'm currently playing as England, and I'm doing fine. I've got like 4 cities here. I have a little burgeoning city on the coast over here as well that's doing really well for itself. But I want to completely redo this because city planning is a lot more in-depth this time around. And the placement of cities has always been very important, but the usual logic behind the placement of cities in Civilization has sort of been upended as a result of these districts. You need to be able to plan what your city is going to specialize in, because you can't really build all the districts, and you probably shouldn't either. But the terrain around each city is going to dictate just how good those districts are. A holy site, for instance, gains a bunch of bonus faith from certain things like natural wonders. I make this kind of my holy city right here. You notice this? This is a natural wonder. Let me just get rid of that. I can show you that. It's just a big lake. It's a big scientific and faithful lake for some reason, whatever it is. I don't know what it's called, but it's a one-tile natural wonder. I decided, hey, I'm going to found a city right next to it, and I'm going to build a holy site right next to that as well. You see, that's generating a bunch of extra faith as a direct result of that. If we head on over to Sheffield, we can go back to this. If I put it near desert mountains, tundra mountains, basically near a lot of mountains is going to give it a lot of bonus faith. So that's going to be a much more effective district than it would be if I just dumped it pretty much anywhere. And that is the case with all of these districts as well. We'll look at the industrial zone. It's going to benefit from having mine improvements around it. It's going to benefit from being near other districts. So you have to plan all of that ahead. And when I say plan ahead, I really mean this, because at the start of the game, you have access to none of these. I think the holy site is the first district you get, but it really is dependent on what tech you choose. So you're founding a city before you really know what you're going to do with it. And my lack of understanding of this district system really kind of screwed me over, because I ended up placing cities in areas where districts were just ineffective, like Plymouth, for instance. This sounded like a great idea. It's right near a strategic iron resource. I have several wonders which benefit the use of fisheries, and I have policies that benefit that. So I'm like, yeah, there's lots of fish around there. I'm going to generate a ton of food, and I'm going to be able to really grow out my city. And yes, I was able to do that. But then I looked at my terrain. I'm like, God, what the hell am I going to do with districts? Like, none of these districts really benefit from any of the terrain around this area. So yeah, I can build them, but it's suboptimal. So the next time I play this, I'm going to be thinking a lot more in depth about where I put my cities, and really trying to determine what the role of each city is going to be before I build it. And I'm going to think to myself, okay, right, well, this terrain really benefits from this and this and this, so I'm going to create this district here, and then I'm going to really focus this city on a particular role. It's a paradigm shift, as far as I'm concerned. And it takes a good amount of getting used to as well, but I like it. I really do. It makes all of the land around a city ever that more important. Not to mention the fact that the idea of city sprawl is something that Civilization's never really done, but it's great that it's really embraced this idea this time around, instead of having self-contained cities on one hex. So there's a lot to think about there. You know, it's a really interesting idea. It also means that the standard strategy of just improve every tile is no longer effective. So builders are something that you make decisions with rather than just automate to build everything possible. I mean, in previous games, we were able to automate builders to just build improvements. No, not anymore. A builder can build up to 3 improvements and then the actual unit disappears entirely. So you do have to make some solid decisions, and you may very well replace improvements with districts later on. There's a couple of other interesting changes as well. The idea of global happiness, for instance. It's gone. It doesn't exist. It's a city-by-city happiness idea. And I prefer this because the idea of global happiness was a very odd concept, a very odd conceit. It didn't really make a great deal of sense, and it makes a lot more sense that each city would have its own issues, and each city would be happy or not happy on the basis of various things. And in this case, it's generally due to a lack of amenities. And if you have a lack of amenities, then there's a possibility of rebellion, but there's also a reduction in productivity and growth and all that sort of thing. Growth, instead of being dictated by happiness, is actually dictated by housing capacity. And this brings the aspect of terrain into play once again, and just the key use of each hex within the sphere of influence and territory of a city. Housing, at least up to this point, bear in mind, of course, there's probably technology and policies and government things that change that. Housing is actually generated by land improvements. Yeah, so you're seeing the conflict there, aren't you? I don't know if there are districts that can provide housing. I imagine there are, because if I recall correctly, there was a holy site building that I could have got through my decision in terms of getting, various aspects of my religion that I chose not to go for, that could have provided housing on a holy site square. Hex, square, bit. You get the idea. So that adds another dimension into the careful management of land around the city. Do I have enough housing? Have I built too much housing? Have I just overdone it? Do I actually need that much housing? How big can a city really get? Does this city have to be absolutely enormous? Not necessarily. That's the interesting thing about it. In previous Civ games, it made the most sense, at least in my eyes, to make a city as big as possible, because then you could exploit as many hexes as possible. However, that's not really true anymore. You don't necessarily need that, because, really, do I need to have civilians working this holy site? No, it's doing what it's doing regardless of that. No, it doesn't. This is not generating resources, You can work the area, but it's still doing things even if you don't. So instead of producing these general resources, it's actually working on its own, and as a result, you're thinking less about just getting as many civilians as possible and more about how do I efficiently create these districts and make each city special and function to the best of its ability. So less of just spamming as many improvements as possible, more about planning what districts work well with others, creating a synergy. And what you can do with these districts after you've improved them with more buildings is actually have more, or indeed no citizens at all working them. It gives you a lot of flexibility as to what you can do with your citizens rather than just plopping down one citizen per hex. For instance, I could put up to 3 citizens in my holy site because I have 3 different buildings in there, and each one of those is going to increase the generation of faith. So I can turn these districts into absolute powerhouses for very specific, specialized purposes. That's a lot of what I'd describe as the biggest shift in how Civilization 6 plays versus its predecessors, that emphasis on terrain management. There are a couple of other nice features as well, certainly by no means as inventive or game-changing, but they do exist and they're worth making note of. For instance, you can create formations now with units, so one of the things that I'm sure many of you have experienced when playing Civilization is that you could have a civilian unit captured by barbarians. Well, you can actually have a civilian unit escorted by a military unit now. You can group them together. You can also, of course, group together great admirals and great generals. In this case, I've actually created an Armada, which is a little bit of a weird concept, but this is actually several ships together. And the reason it is an Armada is because I used a great admiral to create an armada with it, and it's a much stronger unit as a direct result. It's possible to upgrade existing units to be a heck of a lot stronger by joining them together with other units, but only specific units really work that way. It's also possible to have combined arms formations. I believe that comes later on in the game once you get certain military doctrines, but as opposed to simply having 1 unit per tile. It is now possible to have more than 1 unit per tile, and considering the emphasis on terrain control and a lack of space that Civilization 6 seems to have, that is a very nice introduction indeed. You actually notice it over here. We have a Great Admiral, which is linked together in an escort formation. So he's going to stick around with this military unit right here, which is a quadrireme or something along those lines. Alternatively, I can take that Great Admiral, I can retire it to gain a bunch of gold and rewards and all that sort of thing. Some interesting stuff. There's still an awful lot I don't understand, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to need a lot more time to really look into it, but as opposed to just going through all of the features, what I'd like to say mostly about Civilization 6 is that, unlike a lot of the previous Civilization games, it doesn't feel like this game needs an expansion or two to be worth playing over the predecessor. It's a problem I think that Civ has had for a while, in the sense that when you buy a new Civ game, it's often got less features than the previous Civ game plus those games' expansions. So you feel like you're taking a step forward in some respects, but you're taking 2 steps back as well. Beyond Earth felt like that. The initial release of Civ 5 definitely felt like that. And same with Civ 4, actually. Although less so, simply because Civ 3's expansions were not quite as game-changing. But because they've made such radical changes in Civilization 6, it feels like it is a game that may very well be worth playing vanilla, be worth playing without the expansion in the first place, that it will give you such a different experience out of the box, as opposed to a polished up and newer but still lesser experience than the previous game plus its expansions. And that is because of these radical differences, I think, in my honest opinion. There's all sorts of different things that you can do with it that you've probably seen before in preview videos, and you'll most likely spend a lot of time watching channels that know a great deal more about Civilization than I do. You know, they will talk about the way that there is now a separate research tree for civics, for instance, which can affect the kind of government that you have access to, and also these cards that allow you to customize your government. If we head on over here, you'll see that I'm running a classical republic, which has certain benefits, and that gives me a couple of different card slots, and if I go to my cards, you can see I have a bunch of policies. So I can slot these in and out, not necessarily at will. It does cost money. Every time there's sort of a political revolution, you get to shuffle these up and change things around, so you can very much dedicate your empire towards certain causes. Right now, for instance, I had a housing problem, so I grabbed the Insular policy, and I also grabbed a wildcard military policy when it came to the production of classical era naval units, because I wanted to really expand my navy. Now I finally have cartography and caravels and things like that, so I did that and changed that around. If I spend a little bit of money, I can unlock this again and I can change things around. So that represents the upheaval of a major change in policy. And you can see there are different governments that you can eventually unlock that will give you access to all sorts of different things. These basic governments are quite restrictive, and you'll probably want to move on to the much more advanced governments as soon as you get the chance to do so. And this is, I believe this is boosted mostly through culture. Now, the more culture you get, the faster this research is. So it is, again, like a separate research currency, which is interesting that it runs alongside the regular research stuff. It's also possible to boost this research, usually through specific sub-objectives. If I build 3 different speciality districts, it speeds this up. If I am the target of a declaration of war, I'll actually get a boost to the speed of defensive tactics research, for instance. And there are a bunch of little boosts and eurekas that you can get, which will increase the speed, and it might affect your early game strategy. It makes rushing for certain technologies a lot more viable than it has in previous games. Simply because you don't sit there for 40 turns researching something that's clearly out of your reach. You may be able to boost it, and I think that allows for both specialization and diversification in your build orders and the amount of technology that you get, which should hopefully give the game something of a bit of a boost of replayability. There's just so much here. It would take so long to really explain it all. But I will say that so far what I'm feeling is that this is a radically different game from Civilization 5. It certainly feels like a Civ game, no doubt about it. It hasn't departed that far from it. But it has taken some real risks that I think may very well pay off and may make the game worthy of a vanilla purchase early on, as opposed to waiting for 2 expansions or a bunch of patches or mods or whatever. I've run into a couple of problems here and there, nothing related to performance. Performance has been pretty good. I mean, it would be nice for the turns to be a little faster than they currently are. Now, it can take a little while to tick over, which it is certainly unfortunate. I never like waiting too long. It's not excessive, it's, you know, I'd like it to be quicker. I mean, who wouldn't? You know, you're always going to say, yes, it would be nicer if things were faster than they were. I think I can, of course, speed that up by increasing the speed of the animations and things like that. There's a natural wonder over there. Very interesting. The issues I've mostly had have been in the diplomacy system so far. And it's mostly down to the fact that a lot of the declarations that these different folks make are lacking in detail. They're getting upset over things that don't really make a lot of sense. Like, for instance, Pericles warned me not to interfere with a certain city-state, but he didn't tell me what that city-state was. I was like, okay, I don't know which one you're referring to here. Do I have to guess? I'm not 100% sure. I haven't really played around too much with the diplomacy system as of yet. I found, at least on the Prince difficulty, which is the only difficulty the preview version actually has, the AI is fairly non-aggressive. You know, I've built very little in terms of my military. I have a fairly powerful navy, which helps, and that's probably keeping people away, but yeah, they haven't really been too aggressive. You do have a decent amount of different options, and the interface for diplomacy looks pretty solid. There's nothing really massively different that's blown my mind here, but I'm sure civilization experts will notice a number of fairly subtle changes with this declare surprise war thing. There's all sorts of things you can do with that. There's a lot here. There's definitely a lot here. There'll be channels, no doubt, that spend video after video after video describing everything that's different with it. That's not the purpose of this. What I will say is that I'm eager to play more of Civilization. I'm eager to completely wipe this slate clean and start again. And I'm eager to engage in this district-level planning and optimal use of the terrain. It almost seems like this will end up with a game where you're building less cities, but each city has a specific purpose. Throwaway cities perhaps not the wisest thing to engage in. Could be wrong, but you never know. Gotta say, I do like this art style as well. Some people were criticizing it as somewhat cartoony. Yes, it's certainly colorful, no doubt about that, and it's stylized. I don't think that's a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. I really rather like the way that the world leaders are represented. The units, do they look historically accurate? Well, no, but they look distinct, and that is totally fine by me. Overall, I am really quite intrigued. I want to play a lot more of it. It's going to take a lot more to really get to grips on everything that's different about this and do a true comparison, I suppose, between Civilization 5 and Civilization 6. But that was never the purpose of what I was trying to do here. What I would like to say is that this has a lot of potential to be a real evolution on the Civ formula, as opposed to an iteration on the Civ formula. And that excites me. My name's TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, then by all means do feel free to click the like button. If not, the dislike button is right over there. And I'll see you next time.